So I wanted to start with you guys and share with you my vision and voice for my Saim-Hann Warhost in 9th edition 40K. The initial starting point, the entry point where I'm going to start to build my tactics, and at this point begin to really ask the questions, And the duality of these questions are, currently, how does my Warhost work? What are the tactics behind it? Are we going to be able to continue those in 9th edition? And then, of course, with fundamental changes to the rules, and this is the piece we don't quite know yet. I know in about a month we'll know a little bit more. But are there going to be new opportunities within the tweaks or changes in the rules that I can incorporate and then I can utilize? And these tweaks and changes could be small updates that give a slight advantage, or they could be a significant shift in how certain units operate, certain keywords, certain abilities that are inherently built in. Layered over this is the fact that all of our armies will port over, all of the codexes will port over, and then like any edition in 40K, it looks like Necrons are going to be the first, although I would argue Space Marines are always going to be the first. Then the updates will slowly begin to roll out, phasing in and taking full advantage of the rules. Now the vision, there is no wrong way to play Saim-Hann, pulling in this narrative. I mean, certainly as a craft world, it's going to have access to all of the Eldar units. I'm still going to call it Eldar. I can never get out of that mindset. There are going to be the various aspects. There's going to be all of the regular units from the GW model line that you would normally pull. You just paint them up red. So to make a statement like Saim-Hann does not have Warwalkers or Pathfinders, Rangers, that's not entirely true. They do. But my vision on the table was to have a strike force, to have a war host of jet bikes. That's the core, because in the narrative, essentially we're building a narrative list. In the narrative, that's what they're known for. Vipers are also very, very prominent in the craft world. So that's going to be the backbone. We're going to have grav tanks because Fritz loves tanks. Doesn't matter the wargaming system. I love tanks. So we're going to have those tanks. And everything is going to be moving fast. Everything is going to be mech'd up. One of the things that I found early on with the tactics of how the list works, essentially I'm using this idea of phase overload. Phase overload in 40K is where you take all of your models and you load them into one extreme area. And looking at a lot of my lists now that I think about it, phase overload is my World Eaters, my Berserkers of Scalathrax. It's in my Nidzilla list for Tyranids. The idea is by excelling in one area of the game, your opponent can't resist that. They can't beat that. They can't counter that. If they can, you're in a lot of trouble. But overloading them, literally overloading them as an advantage. And the places that you're weak, the areas that you're weak because you don't have the points into that, well, the phase overload is going to make up for that. You're going to leverage that strength. Essentially, it's all in. And what I noticed early on with my list, so my list is essentially, and it fluctuates depending on the size of the game, jet bikes, Vipers, wave serpents, fire prisms. There have been times where I have added in, let's say, ground units that are not mech'd up. And what I found is because I would have 80% of my list really, really fast, those ground units were quickly isolated on the tabletop. Even in bigger games of 40K, where the table size is still the same, but people have lots of models on the table, I still had a lot of places to maneuver. Those units that were left behind quickly got destroyed. So that's why the list is very polarizing. I'm playing the narrative, my vision of the narrative, and in playing that narrative, everything being super fast and super mech'd up, having stuff on foot was a complete liability. Now, that later spawned, of course, my entirely on foot Footdar list. That's not Saim-Hann. We'll kind of push that out. In the Wave Serpents, what I put inside the Wave Serpents depends on the moment. Depends on kind of what I'm feeling like playing. I have access to all of the aspects. when in doubt, the one thing that's always held up across all editions of 40K, Dire Avengers and Fire Dragons. Although I have done Guardians to kind of save points and just get some mass on the table. So where there are ground units, they're in Wave Serpents. So the idea behind the list, phase overload, utilizing the speed to isolate units of my opponent's army and put that volume of dice, put all that volume of dice on those units, make them disappear, and then get out of there, hit and run out of there. So the big question is, and I would have three ranges with this. I would have the jet bikes being the short range. So imagine you have a unit that you're going to go up and attack. I have three layers in my war host. First layer is going to be jet bikes. Second layer is going to be, or is, Vipers. Third layer is going to be long-range support, Fire Prisms. Wave Serpents can kind of float around depending if they unload their cargo or add some dice to shooting. The jet bikes are going to go up. So let's say you've got a attack squad of Marines. The jet bikes are going to go up, and they're going to shoot you. Behind that, based on the range of the weapons and the configurations, are my Vipers. They will have range. I try to do this where will have range to the Space Marines, but they'll also have range to a secondary unit. And then the Fire Prisms, of course, have range, but they'll be in place where they have range to your Space Marines and further secondary units. So the firing order, using the speed to get in place, the jet bikes first shoot at your Space Marines. Isolate the unit, shoot at the Space Marines. Or I guess I should say Primaris. I got to get used to saying Primaris. Nobody around here plays Space Marines anymore. The Mini Marines have all completely vanished, and some more of the leaks coming out. Fantastic kits. I'm tempted myself. But I gotta put my focus into the war host here, and of course Necrons with the new models. The jet bikes will shoot first, and depending on how I roll and the volume of dice, do I wipe out the unit? If I don't wipe out the unit, then we go to the Vipers. The Vipers will shoot into the unit. If they don't wipe out the unit, then the Fire Prism will shoot into the unit. If I wipe out the unit with the jet bikes, then that second line of Vipers, and by line it could be anywhere on the table, it just has to have the overlap, that can now change and go on another unit, say another group of Space Marines, and the Fire Prism can add the weight onto there. So this is the idea of phase overload and how it works. That's an important part of the list. So my biggest question is, I'm sure jet bikes are still going to be fast in some way. Are the rules for the Vipers going to change? Are they going to become oversized jet bikes, or are they going to become more vehicle-like? I mean, there's a lot of changes to the vehicle rules. Which way are they going to go in the updates? The other question, of course, is going to be, and I don't think so, are there going to be like tiered levels of flight? This was discussed a number of years back when GW was trying to transition to flyer rules, as opposed to kind of the stripped down flyer rules that they have now, where essentially you could have jet bikes and assault Marines. They're not true flyers, but they could kind of go into a flyer-like mode. That would be sickness. That would be hotness. If I could zip around on the board and essentially be out of the line of fire, but not really be able to attack, and then dive down and zip down. I mean, I could see isolating certain mission objectives tremendously. And of course, we know the mission structure is going to change everywhere. All the missions are going to change, and that's good. It's time to kind of shake things up differently. So that's kind of the first question. Phase overload. I don't see many changes with that. We're still going to leverage it. The second aspect of the list, Space Elf Magics. How many Farseers can I get on the table? What type of psychic powers do we have? What type of craft world artifacts can I juice up? And using this same idea of extreme mobility to put them in the right place to utilize that. I mean, that has been a staple of the list forever. So are psychic powers going to change? I don't think that's going to happen. I mean, GW has put a lot in. I do expect more command points now, because apparently everybody's getting free command points everywhere. That I'm a little bit, I'm a little bit cranky about that, because certainly people were building lists and taking certain units just to crank them out. rather than GW fixing things, and it might be unfair for me to say this, it's a little bit too soon, but in true GW fashion, rather than fixing it, it's just, let's just hand out more for everybody. I'm hoping by getting more command points that will free up some of the limitations of being so focused in what I'm building. So going into 9th, that's the blueprint for my Saim-Hann Warhost. That's how it's operated. There's been tweaks here and there over the editions, but the core thrust, the core tactics has remained the same. And again, that's just how I'm visualizing it. That's how I'm expressing to play it. You could have ground units. You could have your Saim-Hann Air Force and just have all flyers. I mean, there's a lot of different directions, a lot of different ways that you can go, pushing it out on the table. I'm going to see in the rules what the tweaks are, what the changes are, if I can still play this way, which I'm pretty sure I can, but also looking for those advantages, looking for those rule changes that are going to literally now open up new tactics, and they might not be fully available. I think, on a side note, I think Guard is going to become a lot more dangerous. Not that they weren't dangerous to begin with, but more free command points for everybody. And the reaction rule, probably what was happening is tanks just become wound markers, and people weren't buying tanks, and Games Workshop is like, we need to sell more tanks, and we're going to raise the prices on tanks, the like 400 items that they're raising on. Most of them are vehicles. So the easiest way you get people to go buy more vehicles is to make them beast mode. If that happens, are we back to Guard parking lot? I mean, getting a little off topic, but sort of on topic with that's what we need to see right now. That's what I need to see. The changes in the rules, what are they going to affect? What exploits in a good way? And then we're going to look at the mission structure. I'm going to look at the mission structure and say, how can I utilize phase overload? How can I use space elf magics? How can I use any new rules? Like if there's multi-levels for flyers, or all of a sudden jet bikes can do something crazy, then how can I utilize those to isolate the mission? Bringing back, well, it never left. Way of Saim-Hann never left. We just got caught up with Chaos Space Marines and Necrons and Black Templars and Tyranids and Grey Knights. I'll be playing those, but I think this is an interesting opportunity for two things. One, for me to revisit an iconic army that, out of all the armies in my collection, that's the army that I know best. That's the one that I can play best, just from years of playing it. And second, as a template, as a way to look at, hey, this, taking an army as it exists right now, porting it over to 9th, building it in 9th, taking advantage of opportunities in 9th. How do we do that? And I have the most and highest fluency in my Saim-Hann Warhost. Side note, be interesting to see what happens with Harlequins. We will get to Harlequins. But the focus is going to be jet bike, space elf, magics.